Welcome to the Sustainable Travel Podcast. I'm Emma, your host from That Travel. This is a podcast that interviews a range of different travelers from different backgrounds to see what sustainable travel means to them. Today, I am here with Praneetha Manithi, who is a wildlife conservationist and biologist, an environmental educator, and an activist who fights for social reform, inclusivity, mental health, and grassroots representation. So many hats that you're wearing. How are you, Praneetha?
I'm good. It's been a challenging couple of months, but we're powering through. Um, not not to say you should power through, but it's good. I'm all right. I'm doing much better. Thank you.
No problem. I'm really happy to have you here. This is a conversation that I'm really keen to have. I think today we're going to be talking about, among other things, wildlife feeding within travel, within wildlife tourism, and you are a really great person to talk to about that. So yeah, super excited to have you here. So Praneetha, can you tell us a little bit about who you are? I mean, I gave a whole spiel about all of your accolades, but can you tell us in your own words a little bit about who you are and how you came to be where you are today?
Wow. So, like you said, I don a lot of hats. I'm a conservation biologist. I'm an environment educator, an activist, all of it. But I think I'm also just someone who fell in love with the planet very young.
Mhm.
And that love turned into a purpose, wanting to deeply protect what I love and having a fierce loyalty and passion towards it. I actually started quite young. I was, I think, 8 or 9 when I started my, wildlife rehabilitation and animal rescue journey and going into the forests. I've spoken about this incident multiple times, but uh, there were, a couple of incidents that really pushed me. It hasn't been one moment, it has been a series of moments, right? It was like a domino effect.
Yeah.
So I am late diagnosed neurodivergent. I'm late diagnosed autistic. So growing up, I had no idea why I couldn't fit into these normal social circles.
Yeah.
A lot of the times it just didn't match, and the way I thought really could not connect to the rest of the world. But when I was in nature, when I was in a forest or near a lake or around animals, I felt like I belonged. I felt like I was a part of something. I felt like, why is it that not a lot of other people are also able to see what I am able to see?
Yeah.
Because I'm from India. I'm born and brought up. I grew up here. So being in India means, you are around all shapes, sizes, colors of animals, and all types of people. It's not just one group. We are very diverse.
Yeah.
And just growing up around that, uh, I saw a lot of abuse. I saw a lot of um, harm and injury and hurt and nonchalance and ignorance, but I also saw a lot of magic. I saw what happens when people come together for a cause. There's no age difference, there's no background difference. And that kind of magic to see when people come together, when we unite for a particular cause, whether it is just creating an environmental quiz competition with my friends or classmates in school, to an entire city coming together to form a human chain and tell the government, no, we do not want old trees to be cut off just to widen the road. We are happy with the road. Um,
Yeah.
I've seen all of that, and I've seen lakes close down. There used to be a lake near my house that I used to go to as a child, and that was actually the first time. I was 8 years old, and I saw a pair of pied kingfishers. And all the kingfishers in your books are like blue and pretty and yellow, but these guys were black and white. And
Right.
I was fascinated. I used to go there every day after school, sit and watch them for hours and hours and hours. And I remember there used to be little streamlets flowing off, and there was this one crab who just used to walk sideways, and I used to squat next to him and just watch. And you know, it just um so it kind of started there. But when I actually decided that I wanted to continue being in wildlife conservation was I've always had this connection with the planet, with animals, and I was more encouraged by my family to go towards a more conventional side, say, because I was good in studies. If you want to really work with animals, you should probably be a veterinary doctor, right? I mean, why waste all of that potential? Or be an IFS officer if you don't want to be an IAS officer. These are really high positions in India, they're government positions. And I'm just here being like, no, I'm gonna run around in the mud and go to forest, climb a tree, and fight for all sorts of wildlife. Um, I was 10 years old and I was in a tiger sanctuary as part of a nature camp. And I've spoken about this multiple times, but this was, I think, the defining moment for me. There was an orphaned deer fawn who had just gotten separated from his herd, and the forest department, the kitchen people who cook for the tourists and everything, they tried to reunite him back, but it just somehow didn't work out. So they started taking care of him because they, obviously didn't want to abandon him.
Mm.
But what happened was they did a good job, but all the visitors and the tourists who came there, they started feeding him all kinds of junk food from their plates,
Yeah,
right? And this is so important because we're going to talk about why feeding human food to animals is not a good thing. But everybody from all of their plates, it was like a mix of junk food and processed food and cooked food. And this little thing is just getting fed all of it.
yeah.
And to make it worse, everybody made him into a photo op,
Mm,
right? Just, multiple people just touching this little guy and, holding him. And it was just, even as a 10-year-old, it made me so uncomfortable. And
mhm.
to be very honest, I had no idea what the ecological implications or the welfare implications or how the psychology of the animal would be affected. Nothing. To me, it just, in my heart, it just felt so wrong and so uncomfortable. I also have a picture of everybody just touching the fawn, and it's facing me, and I just have my hands on the camera and looking at him like, you know,
Yeah,
there's a picture that got captured. And it just, by the end of that camp, they asked all the kids, like, how did you feel? What do you want to be? And this 10-year-old me just went, I actually wanted to be a doctor, like a veterinary doctor, because that was the direction which I was pushed,
yeah.
right, as a child. But then I said, but no, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to dedicate my life to protecting our forests and our wildlife and making sure that wild animals can remain wild.
Mm,
So
amazing.
that's
That I feel like that's a very like perceptive 10-year-old. Like you say, you had no idea that it was the ecological implications of what you were looking at there, but it's like a very perceptive 10-year-old to be like, this is not right. What we're doing is not right. And I think even as adults, there are a lot of people in the world who genuinely would look at an experience like that and be like, fun, a deer, like it's so nice. I can touch this deer, I can feed this deer, and it's so cute. And it must be fine because this center who is looking after it has not stopped me or has told me it's fine. And I guess in lots of ways, like that is kind of what we're here to talk about. And I want to preface it before we get into all of this by saying, like, as with all wildlife encounters, like we're not here to kind of judge or shame, right? It's just a case of talking about it, bringing this conversation to light, and it's a very important conversation to have.
absolutely. I think um, there are multiple ways to approach things, right? Where whatever issues we're talking about, when we come at it from a moral or an ethical high horse, and don't get me wrong, I've been there. For the longest time, I did not want to deal with people. I just want to, work with animals. But as I grew and as I traveled and I worked more and I put myself out there, I realized it cannot happen as a one-sided thing, because
Mm,
I've also seen the more pure sides of conservation where entire communities are displaced and uprooted and we have nothing to go on.
yeah.
And some extreme cases, I'm not going to say that everybody has a good intention but doesn't know how to do it. There are some extreme cases of, intentional abuse, but for the large part, people really don't know uh, how wild animals actually should be. And I think educating them and bringing them to our side, that just building that bridge is extremely important.
Yeah, I think for the most part, like I often talk about what I like call the Snow White effect, where people just really want to be near animals. And that's lovely. That's so nice that they really love animals and they want to see them and be surrounded by them. But the reality is that we as humans have created an environment that is no longer wild. Like we've domesticated our own species, we've domesticated other species. And we need to accept that there are species in the world who are not domesticated and can be very uncomfortable being around us. And we put strain on them just by existing, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a certain level of, at this point in time and age, there is a certain level of sacrifice that needs to happen. For example, our ancestors, especially in parts of Asia and Africa, they have lived right next to wild animals, right? And maybe in the future we can go back to that sort of a coexistent lifestyle. But where we are right now takes a certain amount of sacrifice, even from my end. To be very honest, when we follow the normal way of going and looking for wildlife, like when I am working in a biodiversity hotspot or I'm in the core area of a forest, it is, I will probably only see just a very quick glimpse of an animal moving, or I would have spent 10 days and not be able to watch anything, right? It's difficult. So there's a certain level of sacrifice we need to make. It's a gray area. I'm not going to say it's black and white. It's a gray area. You need to make certain sacrifices, but I do understand that wildlife is very fascinating to people.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, there is a certain, um, I would also say a certain machoism associated with it. Like, oh my God, if you're touching a snake or if you're touching a leopard, you must be incredibly brave.
Yeah.
And that needs to shift from being brave to, oh my God, what a privilege it is that a wild animal has allowed you into its space
Yes.
and you are safe with it. The animal feels safe with you. And not in a forced way, not in a, oh my God, I'm going to bring a leopard cub to my house and then take care of it like a kitten. Not in that way, because that is abuse. But just whenever you're outside, it is an absolute privilege to be around wild animals and for them to feel safe with you. For me, that is the highest form of validation when an animal accepts me and they're like, okay, I don't have to survive. I don't have to have my survival instincts out around this person. I think
Yeah.
we need to shift to that.
Yeah, and to be clear, like that will only happen when you're working in the capacity that you work in, like, a biologist in the field. It's not the average traveler who's just going to be feeling like animals aren't just going to feel comfortable around you. And I think to address what you said about like going on a safari, going on a walking safari, whatever, there's an element where, in my opinion at least, that can be okay when it's accompanied by education and it's like someone is giving you information that you can then take with you. Like for myself, I know I'm not gonna be a hypocrite here. Like I have done safaris, I have walked with gorillas, like, and I've been educated, and that has helped me become who I am today. But as you said, you do have to think a little bit critically, like, who am I helping? Is this going to further like my development, the animal's development, or is it really a selfish thing? And those are things we have to ask. Yeah.
Yes. Just to add to that, there are some incredible places that offer safaris, not in like a commercial way, but where um, they restrict the number of people
Yeah.
who go in. They give a good amount of space. The animals are not humanized or habituated.
Yeah.
They're a part of a research project or a conservation project. Those I am all for, right? Because
Yeah.
we cannot keep people completely away from it either. We all, I think, as people, we just want everything to happen quickly,
Mm,
right? We want to go somewhere, we immediately want to see something.
yes.
We see something, we immediately want to touch it. And we
Mm,
find something shiny, we immediately want it.
yeah.
Or if there is a good safari that is all about education and research, and they say, hey, we're doing an amazing job, but we are at our limit, we cannot take more than 10 people, then people don't want to wait for the next opportunity for it to open up, right? You just probably go to a place that allows you to pet a tiger and say, okay, we saw a tiger. I think that sort of patience, that sort of understanding needs to be cultivated within people, and be told that it's okay to go slow. It's okay to wait. It's
Yeah.
just do the right thing.
And it's important as well. So yeah, one of the reasons we are here today is I actually listened to you on Clara Franken's podcast Travel Devil, which I do really advise people to go and listen to that episode because it was really good. But I heard you talking about certain things that perhaps like I hadn't even considered, and I consider myself to be an environmentalist and like fully behind conservation, all that. And one of the things was feeding wildlife. So we're going to talk about feeding wildlife in your own backyard, kind of, and then also feeding wildlife as a tourist. So, can you tell us a little bit about why we should not be feeding wildlife at home or in general, and what kind of issues it can cause?
So, feeding wildlife, it just feels like it's a very noble thing to do, and it's a very small action. How could anybody go wrong doing a kind gesture
Yeah,
like just feeding
yeah,
someone? But it is so complex on so many layers. I think let's just start with human food, not good for animals.
yeah,
I'm just going to do that. Okay, human food, not good for animals. So, animals have a very varied diet,
yeah.
and they're very species specific, right? Especially for wild animals and for different species, you can never feed them the general food that we eat.
Hmm.
Uh, to make it easier, we see deer species eating a lot of grass and fibers. We see wild pigs that eat tubers and roots. And monkeys are omnivores. For people who don't want to believe that, monkeys do eat insects and other smaller animals,
Yeah.
and they eat them raw.
Hmm.
None of that is good for us. Our bodies are just evolutionarily, anatomically not designed to digest that kind of food.
Hmm.
So it works both ways. Our processed food, our cooked food, it is just not good for animals.
Yeah.
There's a lot of artificial stuff. Right. So, speaking of their health, it can cause intestinal and stomach blockages. It can cause infections. It can reduce their immunity. So, it's sort of like if I ate bread every day and did not touch my veggies, or if I ate pizza every day and I forgot completely about my greens,
Hmm.
my immunity is going to come down. I'm not going to get the nutrition that I need. I'm definitely not going to go around and look for healthy food because now I'm accustomed to staying at home and eating pizza every day.
Yeah.
It's just not good for them health wise. And for a lot of animals, like monkeys and deer, for animals that live together in groups, if they have reduced immunity and if they have a certain infection that can affect one of them,
Hmm.
then it affects the entire troop. And
Hmm.
they're all in one fell swoop, they're gone.
Yeah. Noted.
That's, yeah.
And I think when we're talking about like animals have a very varied diet, is it important to note here that most animals will forage for their food? So they're essentially getting like little bits of food that they find. And when we kind of put it en masse in the one place, that is usually more than they would be accustomed to getting of one type of food, right?
Yes. All animals forage. All animals look for their own food. I don't think there is a single animal that will sit and wait to be fed, right? They may have different ways of finding their food. Some are ambush predators, some forage grass and other natural things, some actively hunt, right? But they all look for their own food.
Mhm.
And that looking for their own food is what they also expend their energy on.
Mhm.
Now, when you're not spending energy to find your food, to, go and survive and make sure your stomach is full every day, you are isolated and concentrated into one spot where you know there is definitely food.
Yeah.
Now, the basis of preserving energy in animals, especially wild animals, is to make sure you reproduce and, you have next generations of animals.
Mhm.
In the area that they're getting concentrated in, there are multiple threats that can come through because now they are habituated to humans and humans are habituated to them. We give a lot of diseases to animals. Trust me when I say this, humans are nowhere as, clean and healthy as we would like to believe.
Mhm.
And there is a very, even as a wildlife biologist, there is a very high chance that we also contract diseases from extremely close contact with wild animals.
Zoonotic
So
disease.
there is a risk of bidirectional, yes, bidirectional disease transfer. And then the worst part of it is when these animals are fed and they become habituated to humans, they're concentrated in one place, it is extremely easy to capture them.
Yes.
It is extremely easy to capture the babies, separate them from the troop. It is extremely easy to hunt the adults. We're essentially making them helpless. We're making them completely dependent on us.
To bring that to something that you said that kind of stuck with me, even if, like, so the example that you're talking about, I guess, would be more like monkeys and pets that would be traded in the exotic pet trade. But this could be, I guess, as simple as like feeding birds in your garden and making them quote unquote sitting ducks for cats and other domesticated animals that we have in our houses. It's not always necessarily like quite as sinister as another human might come along and snatch it, but you're still endangering the animal and making them in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And even in your backyard, like you said, when you are feeding animals, let's talk about cats. I love cats.
Mm.
We all love cats. But guys, cats are the number one invasive species of the world that are responsible for the extinction of several native wildlife species.
Yeah,
Because cats don't just hunt for food, they hunt for game.
yeah. And they hunt for fun. And like, this is something I could go on and on about for ages. Like, I love cats too, but we do have to accept that cats are an invasive species, and it's a very complex problem that we as humans have brought on the world. Um, anyway, we could talk about that for hours. So when you were talking about how it can kind of put a lot of energy into breeding, and that these animals are kind of in the one place, like looking for food that they know is going to be there because it's come from humans. How does that affect them long term?
So, first, the population starts increasing, right? For example, monkeys. I'm taking this example because I'm currently working with them on this problem.
Mhm,
They're supposed to breed once in 1 or 1.5 years,
mhm,
least. That is like the least time. It can go up to once in 2 to 2.5 years as well.
mhm,
But because they're getting fed so much, they're breeding once in 6 months, once in 8 months.
mhm,
Now, that is a very exponential growth in the population,
mhm,
right? That is more than what a habitat can sustain their population for.
mhm,
So you're putting a lot of pressure on the habitat, which in turn affects the other species which are also sharing habitat with them.
mhm,
So that is one. Two, when animals get fed, they get habituated also, whether it's deer, whether it's birds, whether it's mammals, any kind of animal, they get habituated to humans. They stop being afraid of people.
mhm,
So now, if a wild animal is generally a curious animal, it has a curious nature to its, behavior, or if it is an animal that is a dominant predator, it is going to exhibit those behaviors with you, right? It's animals are not going to suddenly forget their natural behavior. The natural instincts are always going to be there.
mhm,
Right? It is a different case if you've had an animal from a very young age, but even they will show you their natural instincts. That never just dissipates or disappears. It's going to be there. And for animals that are extremely adaptive, they come closer to humans. They're not afraid of them. And all of a sudden, people don't know how to handle these natural instincts.
mhm,
Right? So, what are you going to do when a leopard is used to finding a dog and keeps coming into your home at night, into your cow shed, and it's picking up a cow, or it's easy for it to find that food.
mhm,
It doesn't have its own habitat, right? Or if when we come to feeding monkeys, monkeys are extremely curious, extremely playful, and they are quite destructive.
yeah.
Not to vilify them, they're already extremely vilified, but a forest is designed to handle that kind of curiosity, to handle that kind of playfulness. Human structures, human shops, humans are not.
Mm.
So now when there is extra closeness, there is a lot of conflict that happens.
Yeah.
Right? And this brings to them getting poisoned, calling the forest department, calling the authorities and saying, can you please just relocate them from here?
Yeah.
When all of them are relocated or you're trying to pick them and you're trying to poison them, if it affects one of them, it affects all of them.
Yeah.
And when they're increasing so much in number and they reach a plateau, if one of them gets sick, if one of them or a couple of them are captured, then all of them just die
Yeah.
because there's no space, there's no resources, there's no health. They cannot, the habitat cannot sustain them.
Mm.
And I will tell you this, when an animal is unscientifically relocated, 90% of the times they do not survive in a new area.
Mm.
It's just something that we do for ourselves, Oh, we drop them off into a wild area, they're going to be happy. No, you're just not seeing them starving and dying. You're just not able to see them give infections to each other that they have carried from a different place. You're just not able to see them fight with each other for territory. That is heartbreaking on a different level. So, relocations are extremely rare. And if you ask professionals, it has to be very scientific, and there is an entire process that goes into it.
Mm.
And secondly, the young ones that come as a result of being excessively fed, they do not have the same kind of immune strength that the adults do.
Right.
Now, in the long run, once the adults are old and they die, the young ones are not as fit as the old ones. So, in the next 10 years, in the next 12 years, we are impacting their population stability.
Yeah. Mhm.
Feeding is great in the short run. And then you just see all these animals,
Yeah.
becoming more in number, and you're like, oh, we can feed them, and they're so close to us. And the consequences of it are extremely high.
Yeah. And I think to bring maybe three or four examples that people can see actively, we could talk about pigeons in Europe and how pigeons are like so well fed that they really do like run the cities, and that can bring a lot of disease. We could talk about, say, monkeys, like you said, in Bali, and how they can be quite aggressive. And like you said, monkeys are used to kind of operating in these troops that will fight each other for territory, and they maybe see humans the same way. They can be destructive in the forest because not only is the forest designed to handle them, but it needs them. It needs them to be destructive and like throw things around and drop seeds everywhere so that the forest can
Yes.
continue to grow. All this to say, there are a lot of examples we could give when it comes to traveling where initially we might think, well, it's just one animal that I'm feeding, I'm just giving food to one animal, but we unintentionally create these human animal conflicts that are really problematic, not just to humans, but also to the longevity of the species, right?
Absolutely. I think that also brings me to when you're traveling or even in your own backyard, when you're feeding wildlife, right? You're not just feeding wild animals. You also have dogs around, you also have cats around. And when there is an interspecies mix, there is a lot of disease transfer.
Yeah.
This comes also down to proper waste management. This comes down to animal welfare and sterilization and having a healthy amount of native habitat around you. If you really are feeding animals because you think that they don't have enough habitat, they don't get enough food because, oh my God, there's so much development and destruction, and that can be one thing. Or the second thing, you're feeding animals because you want to observe them from a close quarters. The best way to do it is grow native plants.
Yeah.
It's really as simple as that. Grow native plants. And I will say this especially for uh, Europe and US and UK. Bring back your wildlife.
Mm. It's such a good point. I think, we as there's a lot of kind people in the world. There's a lot of people who genuinely really do love animals. And it's very easy to get into this simplistic mindset of ecosystems are being destroyed, therefore animals have no food. I will provide food. And it's actually not that simple. Like you can't replace the natural diet and ecosystem that an animal has. Animals are very intuitive and they will be able to survive if you provide them the means to survive, which, as you said, is in native plants.
Absolutely. We need long-term solutions, right? We cannot rely on short-term symptomatic treatments.
Let's chat about feeding programs within wildlife tourism. So to give a few examples that I know of that like I've spoken about on my pages before, but I think they're good to just draw attention to what we're talking about. A great example I can think of is the deer in Nara in Japan, where they live peacefully within the community. People feed them these biscuits that are apparently specifically designed for them. And so these deer have become domesticated. Another example that I have is in Giraffe Manor, which is in Kenya. They feed the giraffes to bring them close to the humans so that humans can take selfies with them. They're doing a lot of good conservation apart from this, but this particular thing that they're doing, they bring in the giraffes to be close to the humans by getting humans to feed them. So let's chat about the multiple problems within this. I can see why a tourist would want to do this kind of activity, but what's the problem?
So, speaking of deers, they are quite docile and very shy. Maybe the biscuits are specifically designed for them, but we are taking away their wild behavior. We are taking away their freedom. And it may not look like that, right? Because it's just, oh, we're feeding them and they have a good life. They're sleeping on the roads. But what is luxury and comfort to a human is not luxury and comfort to a wild animal. The biggest problem is we keep humanizing and anthropomorphizing animals and their emotions to what we think,
Yeah.
right? So one, they are a distinctive prey species and they help in, maintaining habitats. There is also, if you know the case of the Yellowstone National Park, there were so many deer that the national park it started degrading. But only when they brought in wolves back to the habitat is when the habitat started to flourish.
Mm.
So we have to really understand and realize that what we do with one species is never affecting that one species.
Yeah.
It is affecting the entire system of an ecosystem that is dependent on that one role.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
is one thing. And when these prey species come in, predators don't get enough food, habitats are degraded, all of that. But also, if a predator follows them in, the kind of conflict that can happen, the
Mm.
predators are going hungry. I know it sounds very like, oh my God, deer are so cute and beautiful, and it's so hard to watch uh, a predator rip them apart. I understand that. But they also need food. They are also going to give birth to these very little cute, furry babies that, you want to pet also.
Mm.
But everything is part of a cycle.
Yeah.
We cannot take one element and say, we're going to design something that is fit for their stomachs, because the stomach is not the only one in play. And when it comes to other animals, like you said, giraffes, we, especially when the travel is global, we have seen this with macaques, right? We have given monkeys, we have given apes, primates in general, we have given them so many diseases from just being there. There is, I mean, lions got COVID.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, and monkeys got tuberculosis from us,
Mm.
right? And when there are global tourists and there are people coming from just different parts of the world, and maybe these people are feeding them what the center is giving them, but there are a lot of infections, viruses, diseases that can be transferred to each other just by being near or just by breathing the same air.
Yeah. Mm.
And again, giraffes, leaving all of the scientific and the logical and the technical parts to one side, all the problems we spoke about, the freedom that exists in being wild cannot be compared. Let them be wild. I am sorry if you went to a place and you were not able to see a wild animal. I know that hurts, but nothing is greater than an animal, than a wild animal just being wild. Just let them be wild. If you really care about them, if you really want to protect them, you want them to be happy and healthy, the best thing you can do is protect their habitats and say no to interactive experiences and understand where your money is going. Is it going towards animal being abused in the trade?
Mm. I think you made so many great points there. It's just good to kind of sum up. So, firstly, like we're not just talking about this one animal. When you have a wild animal that you are feeding, you are going to impact not only the ecosystem around them, potentially their predators, maybe the foods, like the plants that they needed to germinate, to pollinate, and that they were going to be helping moving forward. Secondly, we've got this issue of zoonotic diseases. And thirdly, we've got the fact that typically for an animal, this idea of being wild is kind of peak, like it's kind of top tier, and we need to allow them to do that and have their freedom. Like animals can be stressed around humans in ways that we don't always understand. It brings it back to what you said at the beginning. We need to stop humanizing animals. We need to stop saying they have the same emotions we do, because them being calm and docile is not the same as them being happy, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, and a very good example of that is in the monkey world, there is a clear social hierarchy.
Mm.
So adult monkeys always get the most resources first because they are the ones most capable of reproducing and taking the generations further. And all the um, docile, subservient monkeys leave the food and they're very skeptical of, should I go take that food, or maybe I'll just give my food to this, adult in my troop. Now, when a human goes and gives an adult monkey food, or even a younger monkey food in a monkey's world, that means the human is subservient. The human is
Okay.
not dominant. The monkey is just like, this fool is giving me food. Okay, he's not my friend. He serves me. I am dominant. I get all the resources. Conflicts are bound to happen because the monkey is not going to be scared of you anymore.
Yeah, this is why they have a
you know,
reputation for being destructive. It's definitely true. So, Praneetha, I really do want to talk about this all day, but we should get through our questions. So when we talk about like wildlife conservation, I know you're super passionate about it, but when we first had this conversation, you said to me that sustainable travel means a lot of different things for you, wildlife conservation among them. But can you elaborate a bit on that? Like, what does this phrase sustainable travel, what does it mean in your head?
for me, sustainable travel, in a nutshell, it means are the impacts or the consequences of my travel and my work greater than the positive impacts that I'm having?
Mhm,
What is the trade-off
mhm.
between me flying around and traveling and maybe going to conferences, seeing a couple of places, to the actual impact that my work is having?
Yeah.
For me, that trade-off is what sustainable travel means. So, for example, my carbon footprint, I am extremely ashamed of it. Not great because I travel so much by flight.
Mm.
But when I am traveling, am I able to build collaborations, international collaborations between organizations that are doing an amazing job, where we can combine the resources, combine the expertise, and have an information exchange that can help projects elsewhere, including my own country,
Yeah.
right? What is that trade-off? Second, if I'm going to a place just to travel, just to see, what is my impact footprint? So that's something, that's a phrase that I made up a while ago. Um, if I'm going to a jungle lodge and resort, uh, am I discarding a lot of artificial shampoo? Um, am I creating a lot of waste
Mm.
to host me? Do these people need to create a lot of chemical waste? Because that is the kind of experience everybody wants to give, right? Oh my God, you've come from a different country and we want to host you well. We want to make sure you're comfortable. And we will try to give you the same resources that you use at home.
Mm. For you, natural environments are, a huge, huge part of this and making sure that you're directly benefiting them.
Absolutely. Um, because in the whole spiral of I want to give this person a natural experience, are we impacting local wildlife populations?
Mm,
Are we generating waste and chemicals that ideally should not and would not be there if I wasn't there? If
mm,
it's already there and I'm going, that's different. But if I wasn't there, would that still happen? To
yeah.
make this experience possible for me, is there any wild animal that is having to pay the price?
Hmm.
Is there a natural habitat that is paying the price just to meet this demand of mine, just to meet this comfort of mine? And the third thing, how are local communities being treated?
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of when you go to a different place, right, there's a lot of, oh my God, there's such a different culture. They make it exotic.
Mm,
Like, it's not exotic, it's just different.
yeah.
It's just a different culture. You know, we tend to make it so exotic, and social media does that. And what that does is it takes away from respect. When there is a demand or when there is a corporate cycle that comes into experiencing everything, you don't see people as people anymore. You don't see culture as culture. You see it as something that needs to be commodity. You see it as something that needs to be made a profit out of. And
Yeah.
in that, how are you treating these local communities? How are they really benefiting? Do they really want to be a part of this? Do they want their culture to be, shown off and having a profit margin just out of the way they eat? I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
people come to India and it's such a huge thing. We tend to eat on plantain leaves, but then it just becomes a trend or a fad because it's been made so exotic.
Hmm.
And that is incredibly disrespectful. And a lot of places that offer cultural or local community experiences, they tend to, how do I put this? Yeah,
Yeah.
it becomes demand and supply. Then we put ourselves in a position of power.
Yeah.
It's not going to visit somebody, it's not forming a connection with someone and understanding their way of life and where they come from, a
Yeah.
community way of living. It becomes, I am going to pay money, and they are going to show me how they live, what they eat, how they cook, how they walk, how they dress,
Yeah.
how they make products. Products that are made by local communities, they have a very deep cultural and traditional significance. It
Mhm.
can be to honor their dead, it can be to bring in good fortune, it can be to make sure that a mother who has just given birth stays healthy. Now, all of this has just become products.
Yeah, I really agree with this. I think, there's been a few times in my life when I've had sort of a cultural experience that has been paid for, where I've been like, do you know what, that was genuinely informative. Like they really were trying to educate tourists in a way that was more on an even footing, and we all were like, benefiting together and learning. But for the most part, I do agree with you that those like cultural shows, it's a spectacle, and we have to be mindful when we're sharing that the person behind our lens is a person. It's not like just something that's been put on for you. And I did a great episode a while back with Pratibha, who's a photographer, and she was talking about, when we only showcase these like snippets of life, like we don't understand them. So we're then showing it, and we have to be careful that we're not actually showing something very personal, very negative, very like not our place to show.
Exactly, which is why it is so important to have informed consent.
Yeah,
Consent, informed consent, two different things.
very different.
Consent, I go and give a form in English and be like, this is what's going to happen, la, la, la. Informed consent, sit down with them, have a conversation in their own language, have it translated. If they can, really understand where we're coming from and what we're trying to do,
Mm,
that is a whole different process. And then not, I'm sure you would have covered this in the episode with Pratibha, right? Like not being in their faces, documenting their
yeah,
every move. Like we also treat animals like this. We treat animals like this. We treat people like this. It's like there is. that sense of entitlement that I will get what I want.
Yeah, very
It
me-centric approach to travel. And I think without, again, like I really don't want to single out a particular group of people and be like, it's this group of people's fault. But the fact of the matter is that the people who mainly travel these days, the largest demographic that are traveling are young, 30 something, the predominantly white travelers from the UK, the US, and Europe. And because you use the word exotic quite a few times, like because there is this like culture of this thing is exotic, it can be a very like tempting thing to document it and look impressive for your friends and family. And I do really think we need to stop this me centric attitude when we're traveling and kind of consider that we are actually a visitor in someone else's home and we need to act that way. Like, take your shoes off at the door, put your preconceptions out the window, just like let them invite you in and learn from them.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought this up, right? Because there are two things I want to talk about. One, just expanding on this whole travel thing, you need to recognize and realize there is a history of colonialism,
Definitely.
right? You need to, we cannot overlook that because for centuries it has had a very deep psychological impact. It to date, as an Indian, being in India, it to date affects the way we function. There is a colonial mindset. There is,
Yeah.
you know, a leftover scarcity mindset. We want to make sure that we have enough of everything because it's going to get taken away.
Yeah.
And that is passed down through lineages.
Yeah.
And in uh, so everything from the way we dress, coming back to communities and colonialism, in India, we have a traditional attire that is called a sari.
hmm
And women, before colonialism, they used to wear it without blouses.
hmm
The British came in and sexualized and objectified, and they introduced a breast tax.
Yeah.
I
I,
mean, that is so incredibly disrespectful and objectifying on so many different levels. And today, we cannot wear a sari without a blouse,
mm,
right? And there are people who will, uh, I have had so many people when I was in the UK tell me this, like, you have to visit the, London Museum and all of that. And uh, I'm like, do you even understand the history of how those artifacts came into be there?
yeah, it's
And I've heard people say, yeah, but we keep it protected because the people in their own countries couldn't protect it as well as we do. I'm like, who do you think you are?
yeah,
That sense of, where do you get this sense of entitlement? Who put you in a position of power to make that decision?
yeah, it
Right? That's one thing. Secondly, there is a lot of rich history and culture even within these countries, right? But it's that the development has happened at such a rate where the countries have driven out their wild animals. There has been so much exploitation. There has been not even in Antarctica there are wildlife. So of course there were wildlife in Europe and the North America and UK and everywhere. I understand you don't, the only place you can see animals or different culture and communities is in different countries when you travel or in zoos. But your countries also have a history. Your countries also have such a rich heritage. If you just go back far enough, where everything was not, made corporate and it's become a way of Western living. We just have to stop looking at it like, oh, that's something very far is something very exotic and something that exists only there. No, it exists everywhere.
yeah,
We
like
just have to be respectful and research a little bit.
we have a lot of wildlife in the UK, and I really think it's overlooked. Like I have a wildlife list that I want to see, in the UK because it's really beautiful. We don't need to go abroad for this kind of stuff. Um, and also with what you were saying about like colonialism, there's a big thing to sort of say, colonial architecture or colonial times. And it's like, What do you mean? Because colonialism is still in effect. Like the aftershocks of like colonial times are still very much happening, and we've still got this like post-colonization effect going on. And everything we do is connected to that. Like everything. And yeah, it's impactful. Okay, so we've talked about how you're an activist as well, and you do fight for a lot of causes. What would you say that some ways are like, what would you say are some ways that people can help or get involved with these sort of things when they're traveling?
Again,
Lots.
everything is interconnected and it is a lot to talk about. Um, I would say being aware and being grounded in our actions. It's not always possible, right? That's a lot of pressure to put on ourselves and other people. But just take a few minutes every day to decide, where is my money going?
Mhm.
How am I behaving? Do I have a subconscious pattern of promoting colonial thoughts and behavior? Um, is where I come from, is it possible that it can be disrespectful to people? And being aware of our own patterns, right? If I have had a traumatic childhood, my patterns are going to be different as compared to those who may have a different type of trauma.
Yeah,
So just working on ourselves, looking internally, it's difficult. I know that life is very fast paced and the world is very fast paced, but just I think we all need to really slow down. Like just,
yeah,
you know, slow down and ground yourselves. Always the first step is to really understand and research the history, the
yeah,
current news of what's happening in a place that you're visiting,
yeah.
and the processes of how it is happening. So if you're visiting a people centric place, please look into, do a little bit of history or do a little bit of research on what the history is, what the current dynamics is, what the current political situation is, what their relationship with the environment has been. Do they pray to animals and forests like we do in India? Or say in Nepal, they have a different set of rituals and practices. In Africa, it's different. Understand, try to be a part of the local community, try to be a part of the local culture. Don't just be an external person who's gone just to view it as an experience. Put that effort into it. Put invest a little bit more of yourself. And when you're traveling to see animals, really do your research,
Yeah.
because the animals that you're going to see cannot tell you that I was, exploited or I was abused. I absolutely hate the term that animals are voiceless. Absolutely not. But they cannot actively come and tell you like people do. They cannot show you in their facial expressions that don't touch me like that.
Mm.
That it a little bit more sensitivity.
Being aware is step one. And I think there are some people who maybe they just genuinely don't know, but I think that the step one is being aware, is like thinking about this stuff. Like, yes, okay, you may not have all of the information, but if you are aware that there is a potential problem, you're much more likely to go and seek the information.
So, for example, if I'm a person, I don't know anything about wildlife, not even remotely in the field, and I want to go see an animal somewhere, say I want to be around a tiger.
Mm.
But as somebody who wants to do the right thing, I would probably say, what are some ethical ways that I can see tigers?
Yeah.
What are some ethical ways, non invasive ways where I am not contributing to abuse and cruelty that I can still experience watching a wild animal? I am pretty sure people like Connie and her project will pop up because that is so much of what she does, right? She's incredible at what she does. And you just have to give yourself enough time and space to want to do the right thing.
Yeah, I think that's the issue is a lot of the time, like people are not looking up that stuff. Like they're looking at, I want to see a tiger, how can I do that? And when you look that up, unfortunately, the ethical projects do not arise. Like it's not a case that Connie's projects and that kind of thing will just come to the surface. So that's what I mean by like having this awareness that you could even be contributing to a problem is, in my opinion, step one. And then from there, things will snowball. Praneetha, then, so what are you working on at the moment and where can people find you?
Uh, so right now I run a conservation nonprofit
Mhm.
that basically integrates everything we spoke about. We have six different headline projects. We have hands-on groundwork with wild and domesticated animals, animal welfare and conservation. We have exclusively education and capacity building projects. We have exclusively a project that works on community engagement, empowerment, and inclusion,
Nice.
where we are expanding marketplace for traditional livelihoods within our project. We have so there are multiple projects that I am working on,
Yeah.
but the biggest project that I'm working on right now is my Bonnet Macaque One Health project. It is basically using the One Health approach of people, community, and ecosystem health into one big happy family kind of an approach where we address all three of them equally.
Nice.
So that is what I'm working on in a very high human wildlife conflict region, conflict mitigation and involving local communities. So that is what I'm doing for the larger part of it. Other than that, I'm also working on increasing representation for grassroots research and conservationists on global platforms, capacity building for the same, to whether it's inside your house, whether it's in your backyard, or on global platforms, and making sure that voices are heard. It doesn't have to be in English. So making sure that all voices are heard is the large part of what I'm doing, and integrating mental health into all of this
Mhm.
and financial stability. Because working in conservation, working with wildlife, the environment, it does not have a lot of money. It is very unstable. We don't know. I mean, I don't know where my next income comes from despite doing multiple projects. But to make sure that the people who are working to protect the planet, who are working to safeguard our people from climate change, from it can be climate migration, it can be wars, conflicts, it can be biodiversity conservation, trade, anything, anything,
Mhm.
that all of them can really sustain themselves. Because if you cannot sustain yourself, why it is so unfair to expect more people to come in when you're not able to sustain yourself. That is so unfair.
Yeah.
So whether it is sustaining yourself financially, mentally, emotionally, I'm working on integrating all of that and
Love that.
bringing it all under one platform because everything is connected.
Yeah.
And as to where you can find me, well, I'm pretty much everywhere. You can find my website. It's www.advaya.org. I'm on Instagram as Planeta Praneetha, and I'm Praneetha Monipi on LinkedIn. I just don't use Twitter because I have a very deep ethics conflict with that platform.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
you can, yeah, you can find me everywhere else.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Praneetha. I mean, I'm going to wrap up, but if you have anything else to say, let me know now.
Yeah, I think I would just my lasting thought would be I think it's amazing that people want to experience and learn about so many cultures and they want to be around animals, but please find a way to make it least difficult, to
Yeah.
make it least invasive, especially for animals. There is a lot of abuse, there is a lot of exploitation that happens. And you, as a traveler, have so much power to influence where your money goes, to influence what kind of demand you're creating.
Yeah.
Understand that you're very, very powerful and you can make a difference. Like, even if you're just a solo traveler, even if it's just you and your family, even if it's just you and your partner, you can make a difference.
Yeah. Your money is like your biggest weapon. Don't spend it without knowing where it's going. That's what I would say. Very important.
Especially if you also have the power to influence a lot of people, use it right. Just
Yeah,
use it right.
100%. 100%. Well, this has been the Sustainable Travel Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Sustainable Travel Podcast. We are also on Spotify and YouTube. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And we also have a Facebook group that is called Sustainable Travel Tips Group. Thank you so much.